Hey, how's it going? My name is Andy. I'm with Nummech Products, and today I'm bringing you the installation process for our Mini-GS VLP-X frame. As you can see right here, it is the version 2 frame, which is denoted by the small text at the bottom that says V2. You can't see it in the video, but you can see it if it's in person. The difference is this frame has a large air chamber inside of the grip, which the previous frames did not have. So we have to make a new video that carries you through the installation process. The tools you will need consist of these two Allen keys, which are used for the marker itself. They're size 3/32 and 5/64, which you probably already have. But we will also supply you a new Allen key, which is a 9/64, which has to be this long length in order to reach all the way down through the inside of the frame. So we give that to you. And it's ball rounded because that just makes everything easier. So this process is going to take a long time because the grip frame is a very, very central portion of the marker. But it's not very hard to do. So I'm just going to take apart everything that comes in the small hardware package. You can set the bag aside. So what you get is the aforementioned 9/64 Allen key, which I'm going to put over here. You get two new cap screws, which are used for the regulator. And then there's a pair of little O-rings. These are size 8 O-rings. These are used to seal the regulator to the frame. We just include these as spares in case you need them, because it's possible that you can damage the O-ring as you install it. Alright, let's get started with the installation. Like I mentioned, the grip frame itself is such a very central part of the marker that you'll have to basically remove everything down to its components. You'll reuse many pieces of the gun, but not everything. So I'm going to begin by removing the foregrips and the main grip panels using a small Allen key by loosening all 8 of these screws that you can see on the outside of the gun. So now that I've removed all of the screws, I'm going to store them down here in the corner. But you can just slide off all the grips and expose some of the internals of the frame. Take out your battery. And now you have more screws that have to be removed because you've unveiled them. So we have a pair of screws right here and on the opposite side of the marker, and then there's 3 in the front located at the top, and then 2 down here at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and take out all of those screws. Alright, with the screws removed from the foregrip, you can very gently pop it off. Like so. Now, the foregrip will be attached to the main board using this small connector located at the bottom. I'm going to leave that on. There's a screw holding the circuit board in place that's located on the inside of the trigger guard, so I'm going to take that out right now. And then once that screw comes out, the board itself will be loose, and you can gently pop it off and keep it down here in the corner. So now the foregrip is removed, and the frame has got some parts missing. So I'm going to, at this point, take the frame off from the marker body by loosening and removing the screw located here and the one in the back. Now you got to be careful about this one in the back because it holds the fairing assembly. So when you remove this screw, the fairing assembly might come out. It depends on how much friction is holding it in. But if it does come out, then you can just remove it out the back of the marker. You can see mine's staying in position, so I'm going to leave it there. There's those 2 screws. So with those 2 screws removed, you can very gently separate the frame from the marker body. You got to be careful not to snag any of these little wires that are inside going to the solenoid. But after you slowly separate it, the marker body I'm going to set aside, and you have the individual frame. So The only remaining items that you have to take off the frame are the regulator, the trigger, and the little button pad in the front. So just one by one I'm going to take those off. The button pad's held in by a small screw in the front. Once that screw's removed, you can just pop it off. This will be reused with the new frame. The trigger is held in with a pin that you push out from this side of the frame. Trigger pin, and the trigger itself will come out. Obviously you will reuse this. And now the only component remaining is the regulator. So to get this off, it's helpful to unscrew this little air tube because it lets you access the screws that are on the inside of the frame here. So I'm going to unscrew it and set this aside. You will not be reusing this piece. And now you can see the two screws down on the inside. Going to loosen and remove both of those right now. Now these two screws for the regulator you will not be reusing, so I'm going to put them over here and you can keep them for later if you want. That little set screw I just took out is hard to get with a regular Allen key. I use a ball rounded key because it's much easier. But once the screw becomes loose, it'll fall out. Again, you will not be using that screw. So now the regulator should be loose at this point and you can just slide it off. Now you may encounter some friction because there's a little O-ring on top of it which likes to get wedged in there. If the O-ring will not come out, you can try to dig it out through this exposed hole like that. Sometimes it comes right out, sometimes not. So at this point the stock frame is completely stripped down. You can set it aside. You obviously will not be reusing that. The regulator is something you'll be reusing. If you took the O-ring off of it, you might want to put it back in. There's a little groove located in the top which is used to hold an O-ring. So examine it and see if it's shredded or if it has any rips inside of it. If it does, then throw it out and replace it with one of the new ones that came with the frame. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to put that in the top. You might want to apply a little bit of grease to this O-ring because it has to slide inside the frame and grease helps to keep it from binding. So I'm going to set that down. So at this point you have the new VLP-X frame which is ready to begin the installation of all your little subcomponents. You can see here in the front of it you have a small foregrip extender circuit board. We call this the bridge board. What I usually do is I install the foregrip first because it's a fragile component. So this little piece of yellow tape that's wrapped around the frame is just used to hold in a new circuit board screw. So I'm going to take that off so I can get to the screw. The screw is just loose inside the frame. So this screw is used to hold the circuit board in position inside the foregrip, but we found you don't really need that because this plastic foregrip keeps stuff pretty tight and keeps it from rattling around. So it's up to you whether or not you want to install this. If you want to go for the best secure fit, then go for it. But if not, you don't absolutely have to use it. So the first step in the installation will be to install the button pad inside of the foregrip, which will just slide in. You want to get it as flush as possible, and that way it looks correct. So now use one of the small flathead Allen key screws, which look like that. Flathead. That's what holds in the button pad. So I'm going to install that in the front and just screw it hand tight. You're screwing it into the rubber button pad so you can really squish it if you try. So don't do that. Just screw it in hand tight until it's stationary. So now the button pad is in position, ready to go. Alright, so to install the main board and the foregrip housing, the board has to slide up into the hidden circuit board connector that's located at the front. So you can very gently guide the little prongs into position and then just push the circuit board against the marker body, and that's really all it takes. And then obviously the plastic foregrip will slide around it. and gets held on just like that. So now use another flathead screw to attach this small screw right here. And then I'm going to do the opposite on the other side, again with a flathead screw. And at this point you should not have any of the small flathead screws left. There's one there, and then the one on the inside to hold the button pad. So only 3 total. You can put your battery in if you want at this point, just like that. So at this point you may or may not want to install the new mainboard screw located in the front of the frame. The screw can be tricky to install because you have to have the right Allen key, but if you do, then just install it like that and you're good to go. So again, you don't have to do that screw if you don't want to, but it doesn't hurt. I'm now going to install the trigger, which obviously just slides in through the top, and the new trigger pin, which will hold it in place. To maneuver the two around so that the pin goes through the trigger bushing, just like that. Alright, so we're almost finished. The main remaining step is to install the regulator on the bottom of the frame. Now this is the hard part because the new frame uses this integrated air chamber, which actually has a screw on the inside which has a small O-ring on the end of it, and that screws down through the middle of the air chamber and out the bottom. So in order to get this screw in there, you have to have this long 9/64 Allen key, and what you have to do is feed the screw all the way down through the top of the frame and into the bottom of it. So what I'm going to do is take off the air chamber just by sliding it out, and I'm going to set it aside. Take note that it has a small O-ring located on the bottom. It's the same that was included with the frame. It's a size 8, and it's the same that the regulator uses. Again, it's a size 8. Okay, so with the air chamber removed, you can very easily see down through the inside of the grip frame, and you can line up all the holes correctly. So take your regulator, apply a small amount of grease to the top O-ring if you need to, and gently slide it on from the front. Now as soon as the O-ring comes in contact with the frame, it's going to have a little bit of resistance. That's why I keep saying to apply a small amount of grease there. But just push it all the way through until you get the regulator all the way in position. You should see 2 screw holes, one located in the front and one located in the rear, and then there's a hole in the middle which is where the O-ring sits. That's really all there is to it. So if you take off the air chamber, now is the time to put it back on just by sliding it through the frame like that. Alright, so you have 2 new screws that will be used to mount the regulator onto the frame. There's a small short one which is located in the back, and then there's a longer one which has the O-ring on it. That's the one that's going to go on the inside of the air chamber. So I'm going to do the one that's located in the back first because I find it to be the more difficult of the two. This is going to be really hard to show on the video because you have to maneuver it down on the inside. You can see there's a small groove in the back of the air chamber. That's where it goes. So what I like to do is I hold the grip frame up vertical, and then I try to guide the screw all the way down in. And then I use a small Allen key to kind of poke it around until it fits down within the groove. So again, this is super hard to show on the video, but it's obvious what you have to do, so I'm sure you'll get the hang of it. Oops, almost got it. There we go. Okay, so the screw just kind of fell down inside of its hole. Now I'm going to use that 9/64 ball rounded key, feed it in from the frame's right side because it has a rounded edge on the air chamber, which makes it easier to access. You can use that Allen key to very, very, very slowly screw it down into position. And then once you get it in there, just do it hand tight. You don't have to over tighten that screw. So at this point you have the rear screw installed, and now the front screw is the longer one with the O-ring. So what I'm going to do is install it on the end of the long 9/64 Allen key, and then I like to stick the Allen key up and then put the frame upside down and kind of like swallow it. It's going to go through the large hole that's located in the frame and all the way down until it reaches its hole that's in the bottom of the air chamber. You can see the hole if you tip the frame up and look at it. So it's pretty obvious where it goes. I can't show it on the video because it's so dark on the inside, but it basically goes all the way down through and into the top of the regulator. So with the screw in the right position, just screwing the Allen key will tighten it down. You should feel it start to grab, and then again just hand tighten it, and that's it. I'm going to make sure this rear screw is tight. Yep, it's good. So that is the frame ready to be installed on the marker. Now I left on there the new screws that we include inside the frame, which are used for the grip panels, so I'm going to take those off. They're small black screws if you purchase a black grip frame like this one. They'll be silver if you purchase a silver grip frame. So I'm going to take those off and set them down here. I personally find it easier to install the marker body right now rather than installing the grips, because it's good to be able to guide the small wiring through the top of the frame. So gently guide everything down in. Now when you get the frame very close together like this, this is the point where you have to be careful, because you have to guide the circuit board together at the front and then make sure all of these little screw heads and all the components are actually going to fit down in there. So you can take a look straight on the circuit board connector and make sure that they're actually going to correctly be installed, and it looks like I have it aligned correctly. So I'm very, very carefully going to push the two items together, and it should just be that easy. If you encounter resistance, then that means that something is binding, something is being snagged, so you should just back off and pull the parts apart from one another and try again. But it should be a very, very, very clean fit with no resistance. You don't want to have to force everything together. That means you're going to break something. So these items are good to go. I'm going to reinstall the two grip frame screws. The longer one with the little smooth end will be used for the rear grip frame screw. Oops, wrong key. Here we go. Tighten that hand tight. Oh, also make sure that the firing assembly is pushed all the way back in before you tighten that screw, but it should be flush with it, just like this. And now the front screw also goes in. This one will be a lot easier to install because the trigger guard has an access hole. Ooh, that's easy. And now the frame is mounted on the marker body. Alright, so before you put the grips on, reinstall the front screws for the foregrip, 2 in the bottom and 1 in the top. Hand tight for those screws. So at this point, the new frame is virtually ready to be tested out. The only thing left is you have to reinstall the grip panels. But before you do that, I recommend that you test out the trigger and make sure that it's actually working correctly. You should hear a small click, like that. That denotes that the trigger is actually hitting the micro switch that's located up in the body. If it's not, then you may have to adjust some of the set screws on the trigger to make sure that it actually clicks. If you don't hear the trigger switch click, then you probably want to readjust it right now, because you won't be able to operate the gun if the trigger is not being actuated. And by the same logic, if the trigger is being held in, when you turn the marker on, it's going to jump into programming mode. And so you may think something's not working, but it's actually because you're inside of the programming mode because the trigger's all the way compressed. So adjust your trigger to your liking at this point and make sure that it's ready to go. You can test out the marker by turning it on as long as you have a battery installed by holding that button. Make sure that the eyes work, make sure that the solenoid works. You should be able to hear it click pretty audibly. I'm going to turn it off. So now when you reinstall all your stock grips, use the new screws or the old screws, doesn't matter, and then pressurize the marker and take it out onto the field. So because you have this large air chamber in the bottom, some markers will actually see a velocity boost because of that. You may have to turn down your pressure a little bit if you're shooting hot. So don't just install the new frame and then immediately take it out on the field, because you may actually be in a situation where you're shooting above your field's velocity restriction. So you have to re-chronograph your gun after you put the new frame on. So aside from chronographing, you will now be basically finished. So I'm going to go ahead and continue installing these final grips, and then this marker will be ready to go. But that basically concludes the video. If you have any questions, then post on the video or email us and let us know. We'll be happy to help. That pretty much brings us to the end. So I think that's it. Thank you.